Ben Martinez stood outside the Grand Palace Hotel, looking up at the golden lights that sparkled like stars against the dark evening sky. His hands shook slightly as he held the cream-colored invitation. The paper felt expensive between his fingers, much nicer than anything he had touched in years. He looked down at his clothes one more time. The dark blue suit came from a second-hand shop downtown. It was clean and pressed, but he could see the small worn spots on the elbows. His black shoes were polished until they gleamed, even though the leather showed signs of many repairs. Ben had spent his last $20 getting his hair cut that afternoon. He wanted to look respectable tonight, not just for himself, but for Lucy. Lucy was his 8-year-old daughter, the most important person in his world. Right now, she was at home with Mrs. Garcia, their kind neighbor who always helped when Ben had to work late. Lucy had been asking questions about tonight all week. "Daddy, why do you have to go to a fancy party?" she had asked that morning while eating her cereal. "It's not really a party, sweetheart. Some very rich people want to help kids who are sick, like you. I need to go and talk to them." Lucy had smiled her brave smile, the one that always made Ben's heart hurt and feel proud at the same time. "Will you tell them I'm getting better?" Ben had kissed the top of her head, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo. "I'll tell them you're the strongest little girl in the whole world." Now, standing outside the hotel, Ben thought about Lucy's medical bills stacked on their kitchen table. The numbers were so big they made his head spin. 3 jobs were barely enough to pay for her treatments, rent, and food. The experimental therapy she needed cost more money than Ben made in 2 years. Ben pulled out his phone and read the text message one more time. It was from Mrs. Elena Vasquez, a wealthy businesswoman who donated money to help sick children. Her message was simple: "Mr. Martinez, please join us tonight. Your story matters. Lucy's story matters." Ben had never met Mrs. Vasquez in person. She had heard about Lucy through the Children's Hospital charity program. Somehow, she knew about Ben's situation and wanted him to attend the annual charity gala. Ben wasn't sure why, but the invitation felt like hope. He walked through the hotel's massive glass doors. The lobby was like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow lights on the marble floor. People in expensive clothes moved around like beautiful birds, their jewelry catching the light with every step. Ben followed the signs to the grand ballroom. His worn shoes made soft sounds on the polished floor. He could hear music and laughter coming from ahead. At the entrance, a woman in a black dress checked his invitation. "Welcome, Mr. Martinez," she said with a professional smile. "The auction items are displayed along the far wall. Dinner will be served at 8 o'clock. Ben nodded and stepped into the ballroom. His breath caught in his throat. The room was enormous, with tables covered in white cloth and flowers. Hundreds of people stood in small groups, talking and laughing. The women wore dresses that probably cost more than Ben's monthly rent. The men's watches sparkled like tiny suns on their wrists. Ben felt completely out of place. He stood near the entrance, not sure where to go or what to do. A waiter walked by carrying a tray of champagne glasses. Ben shook his head when offered one. He didn't drink alcohol, and besides, he needed to stay sharp tonight. He walked slowly toward the auction display tables. Each table showed items that people could bid on to raise money for charity. There were vacation packages to exotic places Ben had never heard of. There were pieces of art that looked like they belonged in museums. There was jewelry that sparkled under the bright lights. Ben stopped at one table that caught his attention. The sign read, "Children's Art Therapy Program, 6 months of art classes for sick children at City General Hospital." The starting bid was $500. Ben thought about Lucy's drawings that covered their refrigerator and bedroom walls. She loved to draw, even when she was tired from treatments. "Maybe I could bid on this," Ben whispered to himself. He had been saving money for Lucy's birthday next month. If he could win this auction item, Lucy and other sick children could take art classes. It would make her so happy. As Ben studied the auction table, he became aware that people were looking at him. A group of well-dressed women stood nearby, speaking in low voices. "Who is that man?" one asked. "I don't recognize him," another replied. "His suit doesn't look very expensive. Do you think he's supposed to be here?" Ben pretended he couldn't hear them, but their words made his face feel hot. He moved to another auction table, this one showing a signed basketball from a famous player. The starting bid was $2,000. Ben shook his head. That was more money than he made in a month. Near the basketball display, a tall man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo was talking loudly to a circle of people. His voice carried across the room. Ben couldn't help but notice the man's confident posture and expensive watch. His hair was perfectly styled, and his shoes looked like they had never touched a sidewalk. The man was Mark Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries, one of the biggest companies in the city. Mark had made millions of dollars in technology and real estate. His picture often appeared in business magazines. Tonight, he was clearly enjoying being the center of attention. "Did you see the merger announcement last week?" Mark asked his audience. "My company bought 3 smaller firms. We're expanding into international markets." The people around Mark nodded and smiled, hanging on his every word. Ben recognized the look in their eyes. These were people who wanted to impress Mark, probably hoping he would invest in their businesses or donate to their causes. Mark's eyes scanned the room as he talked, taking in the crowd like a king surveying his kingdom. When his gaze landed on Ben, his expression changed. His eyebrows raised slightly, and he looked Ben up and down with obvious disapproval. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark said loudly, his voice carrying across several nearby tables. "It seems we have an interesting addition to our exclusive gathering tonight." The people around Mark turned to look where he was pointing. Ben felt dozens of pairs of eyes focus on him. His stomach twisted with nervousness, but he tried to keep his expression calm. Mark stepped closer to Ben, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. The circle of people followed behind him like an entourage. Ben could smell Mark's cologne, something that probably cost more than Ben's weekly groceries. "Tell me," Mark said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "are you perhaps here with the catering staff? I don't recall seeing you at these events before." Ben felt his cheeks burn. "No, sir. I have an invitation." Mark's smile grew wider, but it looked more like a predator showing its teeth. "An invitation? How fascinating. And what line of work are you in that brings you to such an elegant affair?" "I work at Peterson's Auto Repair," Ben said quietly. "And I do night cleaning at the office building on 5th Street. I also deliver food on weekends." The people around Mark exchanged glances. Some tried to hide their smiles behind their champagne glasses. Ben could see the judgment in their eyes. To them, he was entertainment, something unusual to discuss later at their private clubs. "3 jobs," Mark said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "How admirable. And yet, here you are at a charity gala where the cheapest auction item costs more than most people make in a month. Are you perhaps planning to bid on something tonight?" Ben thought about Lucy at home, probably already in her pajamas with the little unicorns on them. He thought about her medical bills and her dreams of taking art classes. He looked Mark straight in the eyes. "Yes, sir. I am." Mark threw back his head and laughed loudly. The sound echoed through the ballroom, causing other conversations to pause. People at nearby tables turned to see what was so funny. "Oh, this is rich," Mark said, wiping a tear from his eye. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have someone here who thinks he can compete with the rest of us. Tell me, my hard-working friend, exactly which item has caught your attention? Perhaps the weekend in Paris? The diamond earrings? Or maybe you're interested in the yacht excursion?" Ben's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. "The children's art therapy program." Mark's expression shifted to one of exaggerated surprise. The art therapy program. $500 for the starting bid. My dear man, do you have any idea how these auctions work? The bidding doesn't stop at the starting price. People here regularly spend thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, on single items. It's all in good fun, you understand. The crowd around them had grown larger. Ben could feel more eyes watching, more whispered conversations starting. Some people looked uncomfortable with Mark's behavior, but no one spoke up. I understand how auctions work, Ben said quietly. Do you really? Mark asked, his voice growing louder. Because I'm concerned that you might embarrass yourself tonight. These good people have come here to support important causes, not to watch someone in over their head make promises they can't keep. Ben felt something burning in his chest, a mixture of anger and humiliation. But underneath those feelings was something else, something stronger. It was the memory of Lucy's face when she drew pictures of them together, always showing Ben as tall and brave. It was the sound of her voice when she told him he was her hero. I can afford to bid on the art therapy program, Ben said, his voice growing firmer. Mark shook his head with mock sadness. My friend, I'm trying to save you from disappointment. You see, charity auctions like this are really about more than just the items. They're about social status, about showing your peers that you belong in their circle. Someone like you, working multiple jobs just to pay rent, doesn't understand the culture here. Ben could feel his heart pounding, but he thought about why he was really here. Mrs. Vasquez had invited him for a reason. She had said his story mattered, that Lucy's story mattered. Maybe it was time to trust that. The room had grown quieter now. Even the background music seemed softer. Ben realized that this moment was about more than just him and Mark. It was about every person who had ever been judged by their appearance, every parent who had sacrificed everything for their child, every dream that seemed impossible but was worth fighting for. Ben took a deep breath and prepared to show everyone in that glittering ballroom exactly who he really was. Mark Thompson's laughter filled the ballroom like poison spreading through clean water. More people turned away from their conversations to watch what was happening. Ben stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides, feeling the weight of hundreds of curious stares. You know what? Mark said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. I think this is wonderful entertainment for our guests tonight. Let's see exactly how this plays out. Mark turned to address the growing crowd around them. His voice took on the tone of someone used to commanding attention, someone who expected others to hang on his every word. Friends, colleagues, fellow philanthropists, Mark announced, spreading his arms wide like an actor on stage. We have a very special situation here tonight. This gentleman has just informed me that he plans to participate in our auction. Specifically, he wants to bid on the children's art therapy program. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people looked confused, others seemed uncomfortable. A few were clearly enjoying the spectacle. Ben noticed an elderly woman near the back shaking her head with disapproval, but she said nothing. Mark continued his performance. Now, as you all know, these auctions can become quite competitive. Last year, the art therapy program sold for $8,000. The year before that, it was $12,000. But our friend here seems confident he can play in our league. Ben felt his throat tighten. $8,000. $12,000. He had hoped the bidding might stay close to the starting price. His savings account had exactly $637. He had planned to bid maybe $700, stretching every penny he had saved for Lucy's birthday. Perhaps, Mark said, walking in a slow circle around Ben like a shark circling prey, you could tell us a bit about your financial situation? Just so we all understand what we're dealing with here. That's private, Ben replied, his voice quiet but steady. Private? Mark laughed again. My dear man, nothing is private at a charity auction. People here routinely discuss their contributions. Mrs. Henderson over there donated $50,000 last month to the children's wing renovation. Mr. Peterson just pledged $100,000 for new medical equipment. We're all very open about our giving. Ben's face burned with shame. These numbers were beyond anything he could imagine. He made about $30,000 a year from his 3 jobs combined. After rent, food, and Lucy's medical bills, there was almost nothing left. Mark seemed to sense Ben's discomfort and pressed harder. You mentioned you work at an auto repair shop. And you clean offices at night? Plus food delivery on weekends? Mark counted on his fingers as if solving a difficult math problem. That's quite a schedule. Tell me, when do you sleep? I sleep when I can, Ben answered. And you live where? I assume not in the Riverside Hills area where most of our guests reside. Ben hesitated. He didn't want to answer, but Mark's expectant stare and the crowd's attention made him feel trapped. Pine Street Apartments. Mark's eyebrows shot up dramatically. Pine Street? Oh my. Ladies and gentlemen, Pine Street Apartments. For those unfamiliar, that's the low-income housing complex near the old factory district. Not exactly what we'd call a prestigious address. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a silver dress whispered something to her husband, who shook his head. But still, no one spoke up to defend Ben. And you have a family? Mark continued his interrogation. A wife? Children? Ben's jaw tightened. He didn't want to bring Lucy into this public humiliation, but he also couldn't deny her existence. She was the reason for everything he did. I have a daughter, Ben said simply. A daughter? How lovely. And I assume she goes to public school. Not one of the private academies where our children receive their education. Ben nodded. Lucy went to Jefferson Elementary, a good school but definitely not fancy. Her teachers were kind and hardworking, but the building was old and the supplies were limited. Mark turned back to the crowd with theatrical excitement. So we have a single father, working 3 jobs, living in subsidized housing, who thinks he can compete with successful business owners and entrepreneurs in a charity auction. This is either very brave or very foolish. Ben felt something crack inside his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. Mark was making fun of every hard-working parent, every person who struggled to make ends meet, every family who lived in apartments instead of mansions. There's nothing wrong with honest work, Ben said, his voice growing stronger. Oh, absolutely not. Mark agreed with exaggerated enthusiasm. Honest work is wonderful. Essential, even. We need people to fix our cars and clean our offices. Someone has to deliver our food. But let's be realistic about your place in the economic ecosystem. Mark gestured around the ballroom. Look at this room. These people have spent their lives building businesses, creating jobs, generating wealth. They understand money because they know how to make it, how to invest it, how to multiply it. They bid thousands of dollars on auction items because those amounts are meaningful but not devastating to their lifestyle. Ben's hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from a mixture of anger and memories that were fighting to surface. Memories of who he used to be, what he used to know, the life he had walked away from. You, on the other hand, Mark continued, probably see $500 as a significant sum. Am I wrong? How much do you have in your savings account right now? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ben could lie, could make up a number that would sound respectable. But something in him refused to be dishonest, even in this moment of humiliation. About $600, Ben said quietly. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Some people gasped. Others exchanged meaningful looks. A few shook their heads with what might have been pity or disapproval. Mark clapped his hands together slowly. $600. Ladies and gentlemen, our friend here has $600 to his name and wants to bid on auction items that regularly sell for thousands. Ben wanted to explain that the $600 was special money, saved over months by skipping meals and walking to work instead of taking the bus. He wanted to tell them about Lucy's face when she talked about wanting to paint pictures of flowers and butterflies. He wanted them to understand that some things were worth more than money. But Mark wasn't finished with his performance. "You know what I find most interesting about this situation?" Mark asked the crowd, but his eyes stayed fixed on Ben. "It's the presumption. The assumption that good intentions are enough. The belief that wanting something badly makes you qualified to have it." Mark moved closer to Ben, lowering his voice just enough that people had to lean in to hear. "You see, charity auctions like this serve a very important purpose. They separate those who can afford to give from those who need to receive. You, my hard-working friend, are clearly in the second category." Ben felt the words hit him like physical blows. Around him, the beautifully dressed crowd watched with the fascination of people observing an accident. Some looked embarrassed by Mark's behavior, but their discomfort didn't translate into action. "Let me help you understand something about how this works," Mark said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone like a teacher addressing a slow student. "When successful people bid on charity items, they're not really buying those items. They're making donations and receiving tax deductions. The artwork, the vacations, the experiences, these are just symbols of their generosity." Mark gestured toward the auction table. "That art therapy program? Whoever wins it won't just pay the winning bid amount. They'll probably donate additional money to expand the program. Last year's winner added another $10,000 on top of their auction payment." Ben's heart sank. He hadn't considered that wealthy bidders might add extra donations. His $600 seemed even more pathetic now. "So you see," Mark concluded, "this isn't really about whether you can technically afford the starting bid. This is about understanding your role in society, accepting your limitations, and not embarrassing yourself in front of people who are trying to do serious philanthropic work." The ballroom had become surprisingly quiet. Even the background music seemed muted. Ben could hear the soft clink of jewelry as people shifted uncomfortably, the whisper of expensive fabric as women adjusted their dresses. Ben looked around at the faces surrounding him. He saw curiosity, pity, embarrassment, and in some cases, cruel amusement. What he didn't see was respect or understanding. To these people, he was exactly what Mark said he was, someone who didn't belong. But as Ben stood there, feeling smaller with each passing second, something began to stir in his memory. Images flashed through his mind like old photographs coming into focus. Conference rooms with polished tables. International phone calls that lasted until dawn. Documents written in multiple languages. Handshake deals worth millions of dollars. He remembered the weight of responsibility, the thrill of closing complex negotiations, the satisfaction of solving problems that others said were impossible. He remembered when his opinion mattered, when people sought his advice, when his name appeared in business magazines. Most importantly, he remembered the choice he had made when Lucy got sick. The choice between keeping his old life and being the father she needed. It hadn't been a difficult decision, but it had been a complete one. Ben straightened his shoulders slightly. Mark was still talking to the crowd, explaining the proper etiquette for charity auctions, but Ben was no longer listening. Instead, he was remembering who he used to be and deciding whether it was time to let that person speak. The auction would begin soon. Ben could walk away now, leave the ballroom with his dignity somewhat intact, go home to Lucy and pretend this night had never happened. Or he could stay and show Mark Thompson and everyone else in that room that appearances could be very deceiving. Ben thought about Lucy's drawings on their refrigerator. He thought about her brave smile during medical treatments. He thought about the art therapy program and how much it would mean to her and other sick children. Then he made his decision. Ben Martinez stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of curious faces. Mark Thompson continued his performance, gesturing grandly as he explained to the crowd why Ben didn't belong among them. But something had changed in Ben's posture. His shoulders were straight now, his breathing calm and steady. For the first time all evening, Ben allowed himself to remember fully. He remembered the office on the 40th floor with windows overlooking the city. He remembered the conference table where he had negotiated deals that affected thousands of jobs. He remembered the respect in people's voices when they said his name. Most of all, he remembered the moment when Lucy's doctor had told him about her condition. The experimental treatments, the specialists in other countries, the choice between his career and being present for every doctor's appointment, every treatment session, every scared moment when his little girl needed her father. Ben had chosen Lucy without hesitation. He had walked away from Benjamin Martinez, international business consultant, and become Ben, the mechanic and janitor and delivery driver who would do anything for his daughter. But tonight, Mark Thompson had pushed too far. Ben waited until Mark finished explaining auction etiquette to the crowd. Then, in a voice that cut through the ballroom's chatter like a knife through silk, Ben began to speak. "Mr. Thompson," Ben said, his words flowing in perfect, elegant Mandarin Chinese. His pronunciation was flawless, his tone formal and respectful but carrying unmistakable authority. "In my culture, we have a saying about respect. True respect is not given based on the price of someone's clothes or the size of their bank account. Respect is earned through character, through how we treat others, especially those who cannot defend themselves." The ballroom fell completely silent. Mark's mouth dropped open slightly. The crowd exchanged shocked glances. Many of them had done business in China and recognized excellent Mandarin when they heard it. This wasn't tourist-level language learning. This was the speech of someone who had spent years mastering the subtle complexities of Chinese business communication. Ben continued, switching smoothly to French. His accent was perfect, the kind that came from years of living and working with native speakers. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, addressing the crowd directly. "There is great dignity in honest work. The man who repairs your car, who cleans your office, who brings food to your door, these people keep our society functioning. They deserve your respect, not your mockery." A woman near the front of the crowd gasped. She turned to her husband and whispered urgently. Ben could see recognition dawning in several faces. His French was too perfect, too confident, too professional to belong to a simple mechanic. Without pause, Ben shifted to Spanish. His voice carried the warmth and passion of someone who understood the language's emotional depth. "Hay una fuerza especial," he said, "en el amor de un padre por su hija." This love can change a man completely. It can make him give up everything he once thought was important. It can make him work 3 jobs without complaint. It can make him stand in a room full of strangers and accept their judgment, all for the chance to give his child something beautiful. More whispers rippled through the crowd. Ben's Spanish carried the authority of someone who had conducted international business across Latin America. Several guests pulled out their phones, clearly trying to place where they might have heard this voice before. Mark Thompson's face had gone pale. His confident smirk was gone, replaced by a growing expression of confused alarm. Something about Ben's transformation was triggering a memory, but Mark couldn't quite grasp it. Ben's voice grew stronger as he switched to German. His pronunciation was crisp and precise, the kind of German spoken in international boardrooms and diplomatic meetings. "Erfolg," he said, "true success, is not measured in dollars or possessions. Real success is measured in the love we give, the sacrifices we make for others, and the strength we find when life tests us beyond what we thought we could bear." The crowd was no longer just listening, they were hanging on every word. Several people had their phones out now, recording Ben's extraordinary display. Others were frantically whispering to each other, trying to solve the puzzle of who this mysterious man really was. Finally, Ben spoke in Italian, his voice soft but carrying clearly to every corner of the ballroom. The Italian flowed like music, each word perfectly formed and emotionally charged. "Il coraggio vero," he said, "real courage, is not about standing up to enemies or competitors. True courage is about standing up for love, for family, for the people who depend on us. True courage is about sacrificing everything you once were to become who your child needs you to be." Ben paused, letting his final words in Italian hang in the air. Then he switched back to English, his voice quiet but filled with a dignity that commanded absolute attention. "I can bid on the art therapy program," Ben said simply. Not because I have as much money as the people in this room, but because I understand exactly what that program means. I understand what it feels like to watch your child create beauty in the middle of pain. I understand the value of hope. Mark Thompson stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and growing horror. The crowd around him was completely silent, waiting for what would happen next. Then a voice spoke from the back of the ballroom. Benjamin Martinez. Everyone turned to see an elegant woman in her 60s walking toward them. She wore a simple but expensive black dress and carried herself with quiet authority. This was Mrs. Elena Vasquez, the wealthy businesswoman who had sent Ben the invitation. Mrs. Vasquez moved through the crowd like a ship cutting through calm water. People stepped aside respectfully as she approached. When she reached the circle around Ben and Mark, she smiled warmly at Ben. "Hello, Benjamin," she said in English, but with the slight accent that revealed Spanish as her first language. "It's been a long time." Mark looked back and forth between Mrs. Vasquez and Ben, clearly struggling to understand what was happening. Mrs. Vasquez turned to address the crowd. Her voice carried easily through the ballroom, the voice of someone accustomed to commanding attention without raising her volume. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I owe you all an explanation. When I invited Mr. Martinez tonight, I didn't tell him that I planned to share his story with you. I hope you will forgive me for the surprise." She gestured toward Ben with obvious respect and affection. "This man that Mr. Thompson has been mocking tonight is Benjamin Martinez, former Senior Vice President of International Development at Martinez Vasquez Industries. For 15 years, Benjamin was my business partner. Together, we built one of the most successful international consulting firms in the world." The crowd's shocked whispers turned into excited murmurs. Several people pulled out their phones, clearly searching for information about Martinez Vasquez Industries. Mrs. Vasquez continued, her voice growing more emotional. "Benjamin spoke 7 languages fluently. He negotiated billion-dollar deals across 4 continents. He was featured on the cover of International Business Weekly 3 times. Forbes magazine called him one of the most promising entrepreneurs under 40. Ben kept his eyes down, embarrassed by the attention but grateful for Mrs. Vasquez's support. 5 years ago, Mrs. Vasquez said, her voice softening, Benjamin's daughter Lucy was diagnosed with a rare medical condition. She needed experimental treatments, constant care, and most importantly, she needed her father. Benjamin made a choice that few people would have the courage to make." Mrs. Vasquez paused, looking directly at Mark Thompson. "He walked away from everything. He sold his shares in our company back to me for far less than they were worth. He moved to a small apartment near the children's hospital. He took whatever jobs he could find that would let him be available whenever Lucy needed him." The ballroom was so quiet that Ben could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. Mark Thompson looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Benjamin gave up a life of luxury and international recognition to become a full-time father," Mrs. Vasquez said. "He chose love over profit, family over fame, sacrifice over success. And tonight, Mr. Thompson, you have mocked one of the most honorable men I have ever known." Mark opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His face had turned red, and sweat was visible on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. Mrs. Vasquez walked to the auction table and picked up the card for the children's art therapy program. She held it up for everyone to see. "I invited Benjamin here tonight because I wanted to do something special for Lucy," she said. "This little girl has inspired me with her courage and her father's dedication. Tonight, I am pleased to announce that the Elena Vasquez Foundation will fully fund Lucy's experimental treatment program." The crowd erupted in applause. Ben's eyes filled with tears as the weight of Mrs. Vasquez's words hit him. Lucy would get the treatment she needed. The constant worry about money, the fear that he couldn't save her, the crushing pressure of medical bills, it was all lifted in an instant. But Mrs. Vasquez wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she said, waiting for the applause to quiet down, "the foundation will establish the Lucy Martinez Art Therapy Center at Children's General Hospital. We will fund art therapy programs for sick children throughout the city, ensuring that what Lucy loves most will help other children heal. Ben couldn't hold back his tears anymore. He thought about Lucy at home, probably asleep now with her favorite stuffed elephant. He thought about telling her that she could take all the art classes she wanted, that other sick children would have the same opportunity, that her name would be on a program that would help thousands of kids. Mrs. Vasquez approached Ben and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Benjamin, your courage tonight has reminded everyone in this room what true philanthropy means. It's not about how much money you can spend. It's about understanding the value of hope, the power of sacrifice, and the importance of lifting others up." Ben wiped his eyes and looked around the ballroom. The faces that had been curious or judgmental before now showed respect, admiration, and in some cases, shame. Mark Thompson had quietly disappeared into the crowd. "Thank you," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in Lucy's story. Thank you for giving her a future." As the crowd began to disperse, many people approached Ben to shake his hand and offer their support. But Ben's thoughts were already at home, planning how to tell Lucy that her dreams of helping other children through art were about to come true. The poor single dad who had entered the ballroom that evening was leaving as a man whose love for his daughter had moved an entire room to tears.